It is impossible to divorce the American culture from guns. Quite frankly, it is. Whether you love them or hate them, guns and the right to bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment. There's often a refrain told about your guns. You can take them out of my cold, dead hands. Well, I often hear that about FPV as well. If the AMA wants to come take my drone, they can take it out of my cold, dead hands. But wouldn't it be better if instead of forcing the FAA to take our drones out of our cold, dead hands, we instead had built into the law the ability to have drones in our FPV protected just as the Second Amendment protects guns. Now, that's not to say that we're going to get a amendment to protect FPV, but working within is much easier than coming in from the outside, and that is what we talk about today with the FPV Freedom Coalition. Talk to you soon.
So I think that gives a good broad strokes of what you guys are. Let's talk a little bit more about what you do and what you've done. Now, Dave, you've talked a lot about your involvement with DAC and with what are they? 3 proposals?
Task groups.
Task groups. Okay, why don't you walk me through each task group, and also how you might get a seat at the table so that we do have a voice, we do have representation.
Yes. So the first task group was a remote ID, and so this was a recommendations to the FAA in terms of what, inasmuch as remote ID will take 2 years to implement, what does the Drone Advisory Committee recommend in terms of equipage as well as incentives that would compel people to want to use a remote ID prior to it being a regulation? And so one of the things that we were fortunate is that remote ID is not a topic that just started. And the ASTM, let's see if I get it right, American Standards and Materials Organization. It's a standards body. It's international, even though it started in the U.S., but it is international. So they created a F-38 standard, which is a standard on the monitoring and tracking of UAS, so remote ID. So they came up with the technology, and this is how, not the regulations, but this is how it can be done. So one of the things, so an example of the benefit of being there, because the focus of the DAC is like 99% commercial, they did not have any recreational input. So the idea was, well, if you're non-equipped, is the term for without telemetry and radio and transponders, that you could fly in a 400-foot dome. So if you, as the pilot, sat in the center of that dome, you could fly up 400 feet and out 400 feet. Now, if you fly fixed wing RC, your eyes start bulging out of your head when you hear that. So we were able to get agreement and understanding that won't work. So why don't we use the LANT system that we've got, draw the polygon, go up to the 400-foot AGL limit that we have, and now you've got something much more reasonable to fly in. So that's the remote ID. The next one is
let me just ask you real quick. I think there's a big fear that we're going to have to mount some kind of identification system on our drones. So that is not the case.
So
or
with
it's not the recommendation.
Well, the recommendation that kind of came out of this task group that Dave was involved in was there's a couple different standards here. So you have one where you have that kind of equipment on there, and then you have a non-equipped, what we're calling non-equipped, and basically what that looks like is, instead of having a transponder or some kind of tracking system or something like that, you are basically doing what you would do with LANT. So you're basically going in there and let's say it's an app, you're going into the app and you're saying, I'm going to fly here, this is the area, and you're basically drawing a polygon onto the map, basically saying this is the area that I'm going to fly in, and here's, basically my registration number and, whatever other information that they require. So you're basically essentially self-reporting your flight. And that would be, under that standard, that would be enough to create that I guess accountability is the word that the FAA is probably looking for. So it's no different than using LANTs. If you're familiar with doing that through Kitty Hawk or what's the other one? AirMap.
AirMap.
And so though, if you think about it in terms of layers, the more sophisticated your flight, the more equipment you're going to have to get on board. And so if you want the authority, in the future to randomly, I want to go out and fly beyond visual line of sight for 10 miles, chances are you're going to need some redundancy on the device. You're going to need at least to be able to listen for manned aircraft transponders, and you're going to have some level of telemetry. And and what sort of fail-safes do you need for the various systems that you've got on board, in addition to participating in an unmanned traffic management system. So not just the flight authorization, but how are you going to manage the flight? And so that's like, whoa, my head's going to explode. But that's when the flights get more complicated and more random. But just as Josh was saying, if it's today's FPV flight where I want to fly here and I want to fly in this polygon area, then we can characterize that as non-equipped, and we're good. Does that make sense?
It does, actually. And there's an interesting video. I'll see if I can find it, maybe link it in the description below. Kevin Daugherty, Stingersswarm. He put out a video. Man, this might have been a year ago, where he specifically went to a location that was near an active runway and used I guess it was the beginning. I don't know if it was Kitty Hawk or if it was AirMap. Drew a polygon around where they were flying, and and videoed it beforehand where there was actually planes coming by, large planes coming by and landing. Drew out his polygon, said he was going to be, I think, under 200 AGL, and then submitted it, got an immediate authorization. And I remember him saying specifically in the video that he was trying to get a shot at some point of the drone kind of superimposed on an aircraft to show, okay, well, this is actually, well, he wasn't trying to, he was doing it all legitimately, and was trying to say this is safe, this is okay.
This is legal.
Air traffic control, air traffic control routed everything around their LANT. And so he never got the actual shot that he wanted, which was and he kind of chuckles about it at the end, because I mean, he's an airline pilot, he knows how this works. He goes, yeah, I guess we set up the LANT, or we set up the map, and then they said, okay, just route everybody around it. So, and I mean, for those that haven't used AirMap or Kitty Hawk, it's not that hard.
No, it's very easy.
Yeah.
So and some of the a lot of this came about and if he was doing that, he probably was using the commercial access to LANTs, because it was only recently that hobbyists gained access to LANTs, and
this was
we will fully admit that. What's that?
I said this was
July
like a year
23rd,
ago.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was only recently that hobbyists gained access to LANTs, and we will fully admit that maybe the FAA kind of went about it backwards, but where they shut down access to all controlled airspace, and then a month later rolled out LANTs, but for hobbyists. And but at the same time, if you are in a congested area, like personally, I'm in a congested area. I live in basically the Phoenix metro area, and I've got maybe 8 airports in the vicinity, and not to mention Luke Air Force Base is right out here, and Sky Harbor has one of the biggest entries and exits. Like, if you look at the facility map for Phoenix, it's just like, where do you fly? And it's like these cavities in between all these other things. But once we have that access, it opens up so much more space, and you have to get authorization to do it. But man, I mean, before it was like a hard 5-mile limit, and now it's just like, as long as you're under their prescribed ceiling, then you're fine, and as long as you're putting the information out there. So.
And so that's a perfect segue to one of the task groups that we're working on is facilities maps. So you know that when you light up AirMap or Kitty Hawk, you have access to the facility map that you're in, and hopefully if you're in Class G airspace or controlled airspace, there's a air traffic controller at that airport. Then you say, okay, how far can I fly around here? There's 600 airports across the country have participated, so lots more to continue to participate. And they've done things like, well, the allowable altitude that you can fly is 0. And so it's like, so the task group is, one of the things that we'd like to try to get done is, well, could we go back to some of those airports? And the woman leading the task group is the CEO of the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority. And so, this is someone who's absolutely involved in making those decisions. So that's perfect. We'll be able to hopefully get through some of the decisions and make recommendations that will be palatable to airport management. The other thing that we would really like to utilize is one of the things that Bruce brought up and that we've been inputting to the FAA as a recommendation for over a year, which is shielded operations. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not flying above the height of the trees or the buildings, then what's the problem? We should just be able to get a flight authorization. Here's where I am, done. Or no authorization would be even nicer, but
better. Yeah,
better. So that's the facilities map, and then the beyond visual line of sight. Had our kickoff meeting today, and that is areas of both technology as well as regulations and procedures in terms of what all do we think are the next steps. And there is an enormous amount of research that's been done on BVLOS, and there have only been 50 waivers for BVLOS. So when we think, well, are we really flying beyond visual line of sight? Technically, we are. Every time we go behind a building or a tree, that's technically beyond visual line of sight. Or if we do anything long distance, that's, of course, beyond visual line of sight. So the FAA's view is that's an aircraft, and you have to have all the things that, telemetry and transponders and possibly ground radar and redundancy.
Chase planes. And
yeah. So, in order to get a Predator approved for beyond visual line of sight operation took 10 years and $10 million. And so, this is a Predator drone, right? Government asset, owned by the National Guard, but flying in the United States, not in theater. And so, so we're, it's how do we encourage this community to say, the FPV people flying beyond visual line of sight are probably the most technical. Fantastic pool of employees and a fantastic incubator for development, which there is going to be a lot of. So that's those are the 3 task groups in a nutshell.
Okay.
I think the key point there, and sorry to jump in, but
go ahead.
I think the key point there is, the innovation that does come out of this community. I think from the day I started in FPV, everything has just accelerated, and I'm sure you can probably speak to that too, is the new technology just seems to keep coming faster and faster and faster. And it's funny because it feels like the commercial side is struggling to keep up to what we're doing, and they're incorporating a lot of the things that we're doing. And I think that's key, that this community, all these recreational pilots are inspiring all this innovation that's then being incorporated back into the commercial side of the business. So Dave, something you touched on is that we do not have a seat at the table.
Is there anybody, number one, does the AMA have a seat at the table?
They do. Rich Hansen is the representative.
Are they effectively representing not just fixed wing? Are they representing FPV and drone hobbyists and professionals at all?
They've been quiet in the for the 2 meetings that I've been there. Rich Hansen has not spoken up.
Okay.
To answer your question, and this is in your earlier question, how do you get a seat at the table? Will give you an indication of the AMA's participation. From what I can see, I've worked in an organization that was 10 times as large as the FAA. So, I understand working in a large bureaucracy. And who do you get to know and who do you trust? And it's not so much an old boys network, but it's who's going to do the work, who can you trust to get something done on time, and how do things get done? And so as I've been observing and as I see that happening, the more times you raise your hand and say, I'll help, and then you deliver on time, on schedule, on budget, on function, then, that's like, oh, okay, this person can help. And so then when they open up for additional seats and nominations, there's an application package. We've submitted a couple of applications. They are looking for officers of companies. So I'm the president of FPVFC. That does help in that instance. But I do think that the more we're able to help, the more we'll be able to get a seat at the table. And so, and as I mentioned, Rich, or the AMA has not volunteered to work on any of the recent task groups. The one from June, which there were 3, and the DAC meeting that just happened on October 17. There were an additional 3 task groups that were kicked off. The third one is UTM that I didn't mention, unmanned traffic management.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think the thing is the last time the DAC asked for members, like applications for members, we were the new kids on the block. I mean, we were just kind of getting rolling, still getting our feet underneath us and that kind of thing. And credit to Dave, he's been able to jump in on these DAC task groups and really contribute and kind of get us known to the other people who are on the DAC. And so, that I think next time around, if that'll go a long way towards getting us that seat at that table. And if not then just keep doing what we're doing and keep pushing and keep contributing and keep going.
And a number of the companies and people represented on the DAC are impressive. It's Intel and it's the co-chair of the ASTM standard group, both of them. And so that was one's a retired admiral. Another guy is or another organization is AOPA, Aircraft Pilots Association, Amazon. Wing, Verizon's has a subsidiary that's working in drones. Insurance companies, League of Cities, BNSF is another one. And you could say, well, what, a railway? Line inspection. They are into drones in a big way. And so we're coming across people who are doing. And this is helping us get more of a rapport across the industry. So with deep technical as well as policy people, as well as service providers across the country.
So there's a common refrain, and I'm sure you'll both be shocked by this. The FPV community is a bit fractious. They tend to argue with each other and everybody else and each other again a lot. I can attest to that in some of my comments. One of the refrains that I hear a lot is that, the commercial industry is just trying to shut the hobbyists down, period. and that the commercial industry wants to steal the airspace, and that they are only interested in, Amazon just wants to deliver packages, and Google wants to put up Wi-Fi, and the theories go on and on. Has this been your experience that you've seen this kind of language coming out of these commercial interests?
To some extent, there is a large percentage of the Drone Advisory Committee is just focused on getting their job done, and so they don't have. When I walk up to them and describe what an FPV drone is and does, they're like, "Really? What? What? Really?"
Yeah.
And they don't go fast, do they? And so they really do not, so that's, a lot of, a large percentage. Then you've got companies like DJI, and, the representatives on the DAC, they're enlightened individuals. They are so into, we're trying to protect people's privacy. They understand the issues that a remote ID creates, that anything, as soon as we're transmitting command and control, that has to be encrypted. And they're interested in bringing along communities and educating. What can we do? They brought up the last DAC. Drones have now saved 290 lives in the United States. Mm-hmm. So, and they're keeping track. And they didn't say DJI drones. It was drones. So they, there is a mix. It's skewed toward just focused on doing my thing. I have not seen anyone with a malice of, we just want to get rid of you guys. In addition, when you remind them of the numbers and you say, you've done some good things for the AMA, 200,000 people, and we've got about 300,000 commercial drones in the United States. We got 1.3 million recreational. Now that goes from little tiny ones to big ones, mm-hmm. but it's 1.3 million, and those are voters, and so that counts. And so that's when, if we could get the FPV community to be a little more homogeneous in terms of recognizing the importance of, maybe we should focus and pay attention to these regulations, we would be the largest voice at the table.
Yep.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate with you here. F the man, right? Like, why should I let some idiotic organization like the FAA, who is stuck in the 70s, the dinosaur ages, I'm sure none of us have seen the 70s. Why should we let, me too. I was young.
I'm not there with you guys.
But why should we let them tell us where and how we can fly?
All right. Yeah, I'll start, and Josh, you can correct me where I go astray.
Yep.
The one is we're a nation of laws, and the FAA has the authority of regulating and enforcing regulations in the national airspace. There is an argument in terms of where does the national airspace start? Is it at 0 altitude, or is it 100 feet? So that's a raging debate. But right now, it's as soon as you come up off the ground, the FAA has authority. Mm-hmm. The other is that they're starting to expand the enforcement role. And so and part of this is also a security issue. But as we know that there's a program called LEAP that the FAA has instituted. You can look it up, FAA LEAP, LEAP, Law Enforcement Assistance Program. And so it's an education module. So if you're flying a drone, a local law enforcement officer has the authority to walk up and ask you a couple of questions. May I see your FAA registration ID? May I see your registration ID on your aircraft? may I see a copy of the safety guidelines that you are following? That's what you heard Josh earlier. We've written our own safety guidelines so that someone can say, see, it's on my phone. These are the safety guidelines I'm following. And if you don't, yeah, you can be arrested. And then if you're doing something malicious, then you can get into federal problems, and then then it's the FBI. So one of the things that we have heard is that there were 24 arrests at the last Super Bowl. And so, this is a security, so some of this is, Oz behind the curtain. We don't know what bad actors are doing because, the federal agencies are, they're really not thrilled about sharing all of the thing, describing how, the particulars, thank you, of how bad things are happening. We also know about weaponization of drones in other parts of the world. And so that one's tough because it's tough for us to argue against it. Because if we say, no, wait a second, you can't be serious that a drone under 250 grams is going to cause any damage. And the response is, well, they can be weaponized. And you're like, oh my gosh. So, but that's but it's hard, because right. I mean, we're bright people. We could figure out a way, and it's an argument we cannot win. So, did I answer the question?
You did. I think that the interesting thing that will come out of this, and I'm predicting here a little bit ahead in the future, when this posts, is that there's going to be a lot of people up in arms in general about why we should or shouldn't adhere to guidelines that are laid down for us.
Well, I think to kind of touch on that point, the one thing that I think we can all kind of agree on is FPV feels a lot like the skateboard culture.
Right.
And the rebels going out and doing what they do and screw everybody who exactly. And FPV is not a crime, but at the same time, you have that mentality, I think, kind of carried over to FPV, and it's not a bad mentality, I think, but I think the more that you look at skateboarding today and look at what foundations like the Tony Hawk Foundation have done for skateboarding and brought it mainstream and have created parks and for people to be able to go out and do that. And I'm not going to sit here and say that FPV should be regulated to an individual space. That is one of our key things, is FPV should be everywhere. And, we don't want to be restricted to flying fields. We want to go out and explore the world. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that safely, I think that, what the FAA and some of these organizations are trying to do is create a safe way for us to do that. And by adhering to the rules, we're creating a longevity for the hobby, to be able to go out and do what we do best and explore the world from the air. And I think that to me, that's the biggest argument for following the rules. And
one of the things that we're centered on is we want to do this from within. We want to change from within. We want to work collaboratively with the FAA, as opposed to we're going to go to Congress and try to lobby and then change the FAA's direction. And so we look at the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, as a great model. They have more than 20 years, well, it goes back to the 50s, of successful collaboration with the FAA, where they have incredible rights and privileges. And so that's, we want to get to know the people, we want to be trusted, and we want to have an influence to work from within. Because I can just hear you're just a shill for the FAA. Like,
and there will be. I guarantee you that will show up in the comments somewhere.
Absolutely.
Somewhere.
Absolutely.
But let me piggyback on something that Josh said. Forecast for me 10 years in the future. what does it look like then? Because right now you look around and you're like, I mean, I can go out into my backyard, I can go out into the field down the road, and I mean, I might see one drone every couple weeks, or I might see, I've got a large field around the corner where, you know, occasionally there's a couple guys that go out and fly some fixed wings, right? I mean, granted, we're in Class C and we're right outside of Oceana airspace, but it's typically under the tree level, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the same look that we have in 10 years? Are things different then?
I don't know. I mean, that's hard to really say. I think that if we're doing, and by we I mean the community, if we're doing things the right way, I feel like that the hobby will be bigger. I think that it will be better. I think that, you know, I personally would like to see. I'm not a drone racer, but I'd like to see more mainstream racing. I'd like to see people actually fully vested and interested in that, like the way they are with NASCAR. Or, I mean, I live right down the street from PIR, so I can hear the cars from my backyard. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think that kind of culture where drones and UAS have become fully a part of the world is not hard to foresee. I just think that we need to go about it the right way. And I think that we could enjoy the same freedoms that we have now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you know, until the next big, you know, innovation comes and we're all, you know, flying levitating, you know, quads or whatever. But I just feel like, you know, if we go about it the right way, the hobby will be preserved. It'll grow. It'll change in ways that none of us can foresee, but it'll be a great thing. And I think that fixed wing over the last 80 years, fixed wing model has done that. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, we need to reduce the barriers and we need to make it easier and continue to push that avenue of collaboration in order to see that. So
yeah, and I think coming from a technology background, I think we're going to see a consolidation and a unification of technology, both at the hardware level and probably at the major software level on board. So that we'll be, if we look at engineering curricula now, you see robotics and AI is taken off. And so wouldn't it make sense that, you know, where does the innovation come from? To me, the hardware will start to stabilize and we'll see much more innovation on the software sides with lots of exits and entries in the software so that we can add on things, do things that are, how do I expand this FLIR? How do I add in a integration with a GIS capability, a geographic information systems capability? How do I integrate with emergency response so that the software, and I'm talking to emergency responders, and I have deconfliction at the ground level, and I'm not getting in the way of emergency. So just, you know, I see, you know, and critical to this is, you know, establishing remote ID beyond visual line of sight, and we knock those two off, and we can see an explosion in the commercial area. And I think an explosion in the commercial side of the community will be good for us, because that means a lot of money to go in to standardize the heck out of the hardware. So then what do we have to play with then? We have an NVIDIA on steroids with a standard AI toolkit that's like, woohoo, now we can play.
Yeah.
It's really innovating instead of, getting out a soldering iron. And I love to build. I mean, I'll miss that, but I think that's short-lived.
Okay. So Dave, I have one more question before we wrap up. Have you tiny whooped the DAC?
That's genius, and that needs to happen.
So it would be legal because it's inside.
Yes, it would be.
The straight answer is no, not yet. Interestingly, I was chatting with a lobbyist who was recommending just that we should have a party with the DAC members and a little bit of adult beverage and tiny whoops.
May I recommend that somehow you get Jesse Perkins involved?
Yeah,
I think he throws an amazing party from what I've heard, and also, I mean, who doesn't love those glasses? But in all seriousness, I think the magic of FPV is revealed the first time you put the goggles on.
Absolutely,
without a doubt. Without a doubt.
You know, in the area that I live in, I mean, I can't swing a cat without hitting an F-18 pilot, and I have taken several F-18 pilots out to just the field locally, here's your goggles, put them on their faces, and the first thing out of these guys' mouth, one is a good friend and he taught at Top Gun Academy.
Oh wow.
And the first thing out of his mouth was, wow.
Right.
So,
right. My closest friend was flew in Vietnam, flew Phantoms, and has not been able to fly in a number of years. And he put the goggles on. I was flying, and he was, oh my word, this is, I can't tell you what he said, I cannot describe to you, how close this is to being in the cockpit.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. I think it's enormously. Yeah, I know Josh carries two goggles with him. I carry, I do that same thing, and we've done it at the AMA field where I lined. We had a bunch of kids in flying fixed wing, and then we put them on a second set of goggles and gave them a ride, and they were jazzed. It was great.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working alongside some police officers and stuff like that in the area, and I've put goggles on them, and I mean, you just blow people's minds with that, and that's the best feeling in the world for me is being able to show that to somebody, being able to teach them, and bring somebody along for that ride, and there's no greater feeling in the world for me.
Yeah, I honestly I think that's the magic that if you could bring that to the DAC, I think that would be pretty amazing.
Epic.
So how do people get in touch with you, and how do they become members if they're interested in that? Walk me through how the ins and outs of that.
We have our website, which is kind of the central hub for everything, and that's fpvfc.org. And on there are all the links to becoming a member. We have our Facebook group, which we are darn close to about 1,000 members on the Facebook group. We have our Discord, which gives people a direct line of access to us and everybody else in there. I think let me check. I think we have about,
And the Discord channel, we do every other week. We do a town hall where we all try to be on that call, and we set up topics, and we'll start the discussion and then moderate the discussion.
Yep. So we have about 600 members on our Discord, give or take a few, and like Dave was saying, we've run the town halls pretty regularly. We often break for holidays and stuff like that, but we try and be very consistent with it and tackle topics that might be of interest and what's happening with the DAC and safety guidelines. I think we probably had 4 or 5 town halls just on creating the safety guidelines for the FPVFC. And, while similar to perhaps say the AMAs, they are strictly, catered towards FPV flight. And that's not to say that we aren't accepting of non-FPV flight. All members welcome here. If you're a model aircraft pilot, then let's go. But at the same time, our specialty is really focused in on FPV because that's the passion. That's our passion, and I think that's where a lot of FPV pilots feel that the representation is lacking, and so that's what we're here for. But fpvfc.org is the main, and links on there to become a member. And
we'll put links in the description.
Absolutely,
for the videos as well.
And Also, we are soon to bring our merch in-house onto the website. We've been operating out of Teespring, and but we're gonna kind of cycle that back in. So hopefully we'll see some good growth, and we appreciate our current members and look to have more in the future. And we invite anybody and everybody to come join the Discord. We usually post a link on the Facebook page for the meeting, and all comers welcome for that. We often have Bruce Simpson actually join in for those. So, and then we do post them as podcasts and as videos on our YouTube. So afterwards.
Very cool. Well, thank you. Any final words?
Thank you for the time, and we're interested in the feedback. There's also hopefully, I mean, you can see just by looking at us, we're a little older, and so I think this is FPVFC is a mature group, and it's a nice dichotomy in that Josh is younger. But we're able to work with organizations and companies like or agencies like the FAA, as well as hopefully relate to the most of the FPV community, which has a median in about the early 30s. So we hope we can listen as well as help the community, and that's what we're trying to do.
All right.
And for me, honestly, my biggest thing is keep flying. And keep doing what you do. The FPV community is a diverse, amazing group of people. And, no matter how long I'm in this hobby, I guarantee you I will learn something from somebody, and hopefully I can teach something to somebody. And if I stop doing that, then that's when I stop participating in the hobby.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure to have you on. Once again,
Thank you.
On with Dave Messina and Josh Cook, and you have been watching the Michael Rollins Show, because we can't think of a better name. And I'll talk to you. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Have a good one, bud.
Thank you.
And that is it for the FPV Freedom Coalition. We're only having 2 this week. We had 2 segments, and that's the way it worked out. Thank you for coming along for the ride. No matter which way you shake it, if we can all fly legally, if we can all fly within the confines of the law, but still fly the way that we want to, the way that we're used to today, that's a win for everybody. Having an advocate on the FAA's DAC would be huge for the FPV community. The AMA is not stepping up. It is time for the drone and the FPV industry to step up for themselves. And as a result, I'm actually kind of glad that the FPV Freedom Coalition is there. I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to find out more about the FPV Freedom Coalition, it's in the link below. I'd also like to thank my patrons. I really enjoyed having my patron community around me. It is a group of people that provide critical feedback and also provide support, and it's amazing. I love them. Thank you. If you'd like to be a patron, link in the description below. And with that, I will talk with y'all later. Bye.